This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jespersen.
What a frickin' week, man. What a frickin' week we've had here on the show as we welcome you to this episode of Real Talk. Johnny Infamous has been absolutely dialed in this week as we have welcomed Alberta's Premier to the show.
Sure.
We welcomed the Spittin' Chicklets to the show.
Sure.
And then, of course, the world's most popular hockey podcast has also been using our studio for all their Stanley Cup Finals content. So things have been wild around here. Do you feel like, are you just kind of like skidding into the weekend like I am as well?
Can't come soon enough.
Unbelievable, man. Well, you've earned a couple of sleep-ins. We want to thank our audience that's joined us over the past couple of days. We know some new faces as well, which is great. We're going to be dedicating this episode of Real Talk, which, by the way, is going to be a bit of a more brief episode than you're used to because we've got a lot going on. We got some exciting things going on today. So we're going to talk to Graham Thomson about our interview with Premier Danielle Smith. We always like to bring the fact checks to the table. One of the things we like to do after a big interview like that, when you talk to a big decision maker, a big political leader. We did the exact same thing when the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was here. We've done the exact same thing when we've had leaders of business, leaders of industry in the houses. We like to kind of chew on those interviews, you know. We like to kind of dig into them and discuss them and get into your emails about them. There's actually an email that we're going to be reading today as we wrap today's episode in the Flamethrower, presented by the DQs of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park from Sierra. Sierra wrote in to talk at ryanjespersen.com. This is going to be a Canadian Energy Center edition of the Flamethrower. The War Room shut down. You probably saw that. This was Jason Kenney's initiative. You remember back in the day, the $30 million budget to tell Alberta's story, but it really didn't do much. Of course, we'll ask Graham Thomson about that as well. Lots to talk about, and probably Canada's most dynamic province. Sorry, not sorry. That's just the way that it is, and we love it. As a talk show, it's always better when you have more material than less. We're going to sink our teeth into our June 12th episode with Alberta's Premier in just 30 seconds. But first, I got to let you know that this episode is made possible with the presenting sponsorship of Alberta's top real estate school online. That's Relo at relo.ca. It's a great place to start your career. Heck, it's the only place to start your real estate career if you're going to be practicing, if you're going to be doing business in Alberta. They've got online expert instructors. They're there for you whenever you need them. You can explore their pre-licensing courses. They get you set to write that exam. And then, of course, they have all the tools to make sure that when you actually get your business going, that you're off on the right foot. If you use the promo code Ryan100, that's all one word, Ryan100 at Relo.ca, they're going to knock $100 off the Alberta Commercial Real Estate Bundle and the Alberta Residential Real Estate Bundle. And so make sure you remember Ryan100 when you sign up today at Relo.ca. I want to welcome to the show a couple of journalists that we like checking in with because these guys have a ton of experience. These guys have been following political storylines, industry storylines for many years. Graham Thomson, longtime political columnist. You read his work all over the place. And, of course, Markham Hislop, the publisher of Energy Media. Both of them joining us this morning. But, Graham, I want to talk to you first. It's great to see your face. Thanks for making time for us. What did you make of our interview with Alberta's Premier? I know you and I have a few specific things we're going to talk to, but the general theme of it, of course, the mile marker we were observing was the wrap-up of spring session at the Alberta Legislature.
Oh, listen, she's a great communicator. She's very smooth. It's hard to catch her off guard. I've tried, and then she can go slippering away from the actual question that you're focused on. It's very hard to nail her down. I know people in the past have been critical of you and others for not nailing her down, but it's so difficult unless you're focused. And I've done this with her, focus on one issue, but even then she can start moving around. So there were some things in there that, we can discuss in terms of, to me, she's not being completely, maybe, just, again, skipping around. She's not giving us the whole picture, but she is so good at this. And that's one reason why the UCP continues to be ahead in the polls. There's many other reasons for this, but still, she's very good at what she does, and it's very hard to nail her down. unless you're going after her on one issue. And I've tried that, and it becomes repetitious for the audience trying to follow.
Yeah. Hey, listen, I know that there's going to be some people that are going to be watching or listening to us today, maybe streaming the audio live on the Mixler app presented by California Closets. Maybe they didn't hear the interview with Alberta's Premier. So we're going to roll a few clips, a few of the highlights kind of that jumped out at us. What I thought the most striking moment of the whole thing, she appoints former Alberta Premier Alison Redford to the board of a Crown Corp of Invest Alberta. To a lot of people's surprise, I mean, Redford and Danielle Smith were vicious political opponents in the early 2010s. Of course, that time, Danielle Smith, leader of the Wild Rose Party, the Upstart, everybody thought that she might be Alberta's next premier at that time. I mean, these two, there was no love lost. And then all of a sudden, it appears as though they've made amends, so to speak. So I asked Danielle Smith, what was your conversation like with former Premier Redford before this appointment? And Johnny, why don't we roll that clip? Here's what she told us. What was your conversation like with the former premier ahead of this appointment?
Well, I can tell you, I mean, people know that we're not personal friends. We were probably some of the fiercest critics of each other when we were both in politics together. And one of the things that struck me when we did have our meeting is the work that she's done around the world. She hasn't been able to work in Alberta, which I think is a real shame for somebody who served our province in the capacity as premier. So she's gone around the world and assisted countries in helping to establish oil and gas regulators, most notably in Guyana, which I've been told is going to be one of the future superpowers for oil production. And so I thought that was an interesting world experience to have. And Invest Alberta is an agency that reaches out into the world to try to bring investment here. So it seemed to me like that was the best use of her expertise. And I think she just wants to be able to work in Alberta again. And after 10 years, I believe in second chances. And I think that she deserves a second chance.
She told you that she couldn't find work in Alberta?
I think that's unfortunate. I mean, most premiers, if you look at any of the other premiers, Ed Stelmach, he's the chair of the board of Covenant Health. You look at Dave Hancock, he's a judge. If you look at Jason Kenney, he's on multiple boards, including various academic boards as well as law firms. I'm sure that Ms. Notley is going to have a number of opportunities, and quite frankly, that just didn't happen for Alison Redford, and I do think that's a shame. So I think we want to attract good people into politics. The reward for being in politics shouldn't be you're never able to work in your province again, and you remain ostracized and a social pariah for life. If that's how we treat people, we're not going to have good people run for office. So
that's Danielle Smith on our June 12th episode. Graham, I got a text from a former senior conservative political staffer with the UCP right after that interview that he said, I can't believe she said that about Redford, that she couldn't find work in Alberta. Were you surprised, Graham?
Well, yeah, I think she actually has worked in Alberta. In fact, I've been following her on Facebook. She's managed to find work, as far as I can tell, no problem. So, when it comes to, again, talking to the premier, she says things. And you've really got to fact check her as she goes along. You need somebody in the background actually checking.
Yeah, people have all sorts of wonderful feedback. How I should have a team of 25 people. Here's the deal, man. We get the premier on the record. We do shows digging into what she says. Somebody was critical of me that I hadn't dove into Alison Redford's LinkedIn before I asked the premier what the fuck. I mean, this is ridiculous. That's not the point. The point is the current and sitting premier of Alberta claims, and I mean, if she's lying, I mean, Alison Redford can do an interview with me as well and say that that's bullshit. I'd be blown away if she did, but it's quite a thing for a sitting premier to say about a former premier, isn't it, on the record?
Well, yeah, absolutely. But again, did she fact check this? She tends to say these things without actually checking. And this has been we can get into this all kinds of details about how Smith tends to say things, and then when you fact check them, it doesn't turn out to be true. As for Redford, listen, she is a very smart person. She has got a great resume, except of course for being forced out as premier by her own party. Other than that, she has an impressive history. She's very, very smart. But yeah, the reason why she's been put on the board of Invest Alberta is still a bit of a a question mark.
Yeah, we welcome Markham Hislop to the show as well, publisher Energy Media. Markham, what's shaking, my man? You've got this kind of like demure smile as Graham's talking about the political relationship and the history, the former, I guess, bad blood between Redford and Danielle Smith. Were you surprised to see that appointment to Invest Alberta to the board?
Well, here's my take on this. I've had discussions with senior journalists because back in the day, journalists were very, very reluctant to call politicians liars. I don't know if she made a mistake. I don't know what her state of mind was, her understanding of the issue. Calling somebody a liar is very difficult. Donald Trump changed all that. And I think now, when we've had 2 years of Danielle Smith in the premier's chair, and we've had so many fibs. I mean, just the volume of them is almost Trumpian. And I've come to the conclusion that she has now crossed the threshold, and we just assume that most of or much of what she says is a lie, or it's a stretch, or it's a fib, or I've got to the point where I don't fact check Danielle Smith anymore. I just assume she's wrong or lying. And especially on energy issues, the stuff that she says is not credible. I can go to the data in 30 seconds and disprove what she says. So if I did that, that would be my entire job. Graham and I could fact check her 24/7. And if somebody would pay us to do that, I suppose we would. What's the point?
Okay, well, listen, I want to ask both of you about, we talked to you about carbon capture, the context of this. The Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland, basically says that once the law passes through Senate in Ottawa, basically funds are going to be available for some of these carbon capture projects, and she wants to see shovels in the ground. Those are projects like Pathways Alliance, so I had to ask her, obviously, about Capital Power, pressing pause or maybe pressing the kill button. I'll ask you two about that, on that $2.5 billion carbon capture project in Genesee. I asked her if she's still bullish on it. I asked her for her thoughts on carbon capture, and here's what the Premier told us.
The folks who are in the carbon capture space, they've been waiting for this ITC, and they commented about how fast we moved on ours. We started 2 years after the feds, and we put it in our budget implementation plan. So we're giving a 12% rebate on capital costs for those projects, and that is meant to tie in with the federal plan. I believe theirs is supposed to be passed before they rise in June, and so I would expect the same thing as Minister Freeland, that I'd like to see some pipe ordered so that we can start seeing some of these projects go. When it comes to the existing facilities, it's a little more complicated to try to tack on a carbon capture project on an existing operating facility.
Okay, so this is the Premier talking about that, and Graham, she basically says she wants to see, or she perceives, or she's viewing that Genesee project as pressing pause, not pressing kill. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm a skeptic. I've been looking at carbon capture now go back to 2008. Premier Stelmach, was going to have $2 billion to kickstart half a dozen carbon capture projects, and we'd be a world leader and be eventually by 2050, I think, sequestering 140 million tons a year. Well, 10 years later, we've got, like 1-2 projects here doing maybe 2 million tons a year. These are really expensive. And the thing is, they are expensive. The technology can work. The problem is scaling it up. And when it comes to Genesee, they're saying, look, the economics just aren't there. And these things are expensive. You need either government subsidies or a really high carbon tax to make these things work. And now you've got the Alberta government blaming the federal government for not doing enough, and the federal government's actually blaming Alberta for not doing enough. The thing is, on this issue, interestingly enough, they actually agree. Like, they're both in favor of carbon capture and sequestration. Actually, now it's called carbon capture utilization and sequestration. You can use some of the carbon to make things like plastics and chemicals. But the thing is, the bottom line, the problem with carbon capture, even worldwide, we're doing like 0.1% of our emissions are being captured worldwide, and that may increase over time. But politicians are saying this is the way we can do it. We can use technology to capture our emissions from large industrial plants and put them underground, and problem solved in many, many ways. But the thing is, it just hasn't worked out that way. So Genesee, it was, I guess, predictable in the sense that they would pull out because they're saying the economics just aren't there. And that's the problem with these things. They're big, expensive, and difficult to scale up. And we've seen more projects fail in Alberta than actually have succeeded.
Markham, you've got a column. People can read your work at energy.media. That's energy with an I, and it will link to it in the show notes here. Your headline, RIP, oil sands companies, you only have 5 to 10 years left. I went, whoa. When I saw that, that's going to get some clicks. But how does that factor in your perspective there? And obviously you and I will talk more about on that in a moment, but does that factor into a conversation on carbon capture?
Well, it absolutely does, because the carbon, Alex Pourbet, who was I think he's now the chairman or past chairman of Cenovus, one of the oil sands companies, said that they're looking to government for $50 billion to help decarbonize the oil sands, and most of it will go for carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Now, let me lay out the argument, because we're talking about the future. We don't predict the future with accuracy, but there's an argument that the oil sands are in dire danger. So here it is. Clayton H. Christensen is a former Harvard Business Harvard Business School professor. He wrote a classic book back in the late 1990s. And what he said was, well-run, well-managed, profitable, big companies fail all the time. The reason they fail is because they are faced with a disruptive innovation. That means there's a product or service that is introduced into the market that takes their customers away. And they're big enough, they're not nimble enough to respond to that and meet the competition and lower their prices or whatever it might be. And so they fail. And we've seen examples of that. IBM, Blockbuster and Netflix, for example, would be that's an example of that. So I applied that idea to the oil sands, and 50%, almost 50% of global oil demand comes from the transportation sector. Well, if electric transportation, not just cars and trucks, but medium-duty vans and buses and e-bikes and all of that together, if that is not a major disruption in the transportation market, I don't know what is. And so you can foresee a future in which China, through its expansion of its EV industry, then the Americans are building one because they want to catch up, then the EU wants to catch up to the Americans. So there's a global EV race going on. If that bites into global oil demand, as the IEA now just the other day said, oil demand is not going to peak in 2020 and 2030. It'll be 2029. We're actually moving up the goalposts. If that happens, the oil sands are in trouble. So here's a scenario where we could be spending $50 billion to build carbon capture and storage for the oil sands just in time to have those companies fail.
Okay.
So the taxpayers would be on the hook for stranded assets.
More on that in a minute, Markham. Graham, I want to ask you about, this is really interesting scenario. So we have, NDP MLA Shannon Phillips here in studio a couple of weeks ago. This was on the heels of ACERT, Alberta's police watchdog, recommending charges, for these Lethbridge police officers that were basically surveilling or harassing her. I think everybody knows the story. You can go back in our archives and watch the interview if you missed it. Shortly after that, like days after she talks to us, she resigns. And a lot of people think maybe whatever, I shouldn't get ahead of myself. Some people think that if the new leader of the NDP doesn't have a seat at the Alberta legislature, hypothetically speaking, that they could run down there. But Phillips, in her resignation, makes some pretty damning remarks about the state of Alberta politics, about sort of like right-wing extremists, misinformation, online hatred. It was really striking stuff. And so we asked Danielle Smith about it. And I thought it was pretty fascinating that she invokes the name of a former newspaper columnist, turned Edmonton city councillor, turned member of parliament, turned whatever he's doing now, Kerry Diott, who Edmonton police tried to sort of scoop into a DUI charge many years ago. And I think everybody remembers that story, although it feels like a lifetime ago. So Danielle Smith invokes Kerry Diott's name in talking about Shannon Phillips. Here's that clip from our show.
I think every politician has an expectation that they're not going to be surveilled by police. I was just as alarmed by the allegations and findings against Shannon Phillips as I was against Kerry Diott. So this is not a partisan issue. We've had instances where this has occurred in the past. Now, as you know, this is in the hands of my Justice Minister and Attorney General. So I don't comment on the decision for why the Crown made that choice. But I think that the message has been sent, and I would hope that we don't see these kinds of cases going forward, because it's clearly had a major impact on Shannon Phillips. And we want people, again, to feel comfortable putting their name forward in politics.
Graham, is that apples and apples? Shannon Phillips,
No,
Carrie Dion?
yeah, it's just, yeah, and you've got the Premier really dismissing what happened to Shannon Phillips by saying, oh, I'm sorry she feels that way. When, of course, one of the big issues right now is women being attacked by right-wing crazies. And these are progressive women politicians being attacked by the right wing. So this is an endemic problem. And this is something that Smith just doesn't address. Because the thing is, if you address it, it's like climate change. Smith will not use the term climate change. If you use the term climate change, then you got to really start dealing with it seriously. And the same thing here with this. It is the comparison that she's using. Carrie Dion, listen, the thing is, I was actually there in the bar that night 20 years ago. I think it was Outback.
You were there?
I was in the bar when there's a bunch of reporters hanging out after work, basically, and the word came from the
Edmonton Sun newsroom.
Yeah, the newsroom called. It
was at overtime.
Yeah, overtime. That was it. Overtime. Sorry, overtime. So the word came from the Edmonton Sun. There's police outside surveilling the place, looking basically to trap Dion. Apparently, maybe drinking and driving. I'm not saying he was drinking at all. But I'm just saying they were out there. So I went out in the parking lot looking, where are the police? Anyway, this was an issue. Actually, the
huge
police were
issue.
surveilling him. Sorry?
It was a huge issue. You're right.
Oh, absolutely.
For people that don't know, by the way, I don't even know. I mean, I wish I knew this person's name so they could get credit. But this was like a junior, as far as I know, like a junior staffer or somebody that was like overnight on the assignment desk at the Sun that heard Carrie Dion's name. They heard the chatter on the police scanner. And that was how they found out what was happening.
And then they called Dion, and we all kind of
that's a crazy story.
Of course,
by the
it was happening. This was absolutely wrong. But comparing that, Dion, of course, is basically very critical of the Edmonton police. They were trying to get back at him. That's to me a standalone issue, as opposed to women in politics being attacked. And this is a case where she was being surveilled and I guess harassed by the fact that she is a progressive woman politician, progressive politician. So you can't compare the two. And the thing is, by Smith framing it in that way and then saying, oh, I'm sorry she feels that way about Smith, about Phillips, and how what's actually happened to her really diminishes what's actually happening out there in politics when you've got women especially under attack by mostly right-wing crazies online. And of course, in this case, the police actually doing something horrific. And there was ACERT, the people that actually investigate the police say they should be charged, and the Crown decided not to charge, and that's making it even more outrageous.
Hey, before we thank you for your time, Graham, and then Markham, you and I are going to talk a little bit more about the oil sands, because I know that your column is going to obviously raise a few eyebrows, which is maybe part of the point. But Graham, before we thank you for your time, I got to ask you about this event that's going down in Calgary, and I did ask Premier about this injection of truth event. This is like, I'm not even going to mention some of the people that are there, because I have it's an unbelievable cast of characters. These are like anti-vaxxers. There's a particularly prominent disgraced Edmonton physician that's been, what's the medical equivalent of disbarred? Like, he doesn't have his license to practice, but he's like the loud, anyway, I've said enough about that character already. But there's like an event basically where they're talking about children and vaccines, and they want Alberta to change its policy on all of it. If you check out, it's on the actual party website. It's at unitedconservative.ca, and if you see it there, you'll see that it's sold out, man. They're going to pack the house in Calgary, Lougheed. And I asked the Premier, I said, why are you allowing this to happen? Why are you allowing this to go down? Like, it's a bit of a tough look for the party now, post-pandemic, isn't it? And here's what Danielle Smith said.
As you know, UCP policy is advisory to government. Government policy is very different. The process we go through in government is we hear from all voices, listen to all stakeholders, and we make the best decisions for the interests of Albertans. And the decisions we made as government is that these vaccines are available to anyone who wants them from the age of 6 months forward, and as are all of the other vaccines. And I think what we're seeing is that with the MMR vaccine and the DTaP vaccine, there's a very high uptake. I believe over 75%, which is very positive because those are very dangerous childhood illnesses. On the COVID vaccine, there's less. It's less than 10%. I see from the stats that we keep on immunization. So parents are looking at the various options for their kids, talking to the doctors, and making the best decision to protect the health of their children. That's what we're allowing. We're allowing parents to be the decision makers here, and we'll make all the vaccines available for those who want them.
Okay, so that's the premier who's kind of like part of her brand is that she'll hear people out. She's not afraid to hear different opinions. She wants to hear views from across the spectrum, and then, she's big on freedom. People can decide for themselves. Graham, how did her response to my question land with you?
Yeah, this is the problem, right? So both sides. Hey, some say vaccines are good. Some say they kill children. Discuss. You should follow the science. Again, it's like climate change, but you follow the science on these things. But she has a history, of course, playing to a base. But also she believed this during the pandemic as a radio show host. She was talking about ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine as potential treatments for COVID. These have been debunked, but she pushes these ideas. She was talking about stage 4 cancer, the first 3 stages of cancer. You can actually maybe cure yourself as opposed to letting cancer run amok in your body. These crazy ideas, but she played to a base, and she believes some of this stuff herself, but she played to a base that really much believes this. And now she is letting the party have it. She said, look, the party can do what it wants. It's not government policy. They can do what they want. But the thing is, and at the end of the day, let parents decide. The thing is, you can't let people put out all this garbage, this pseudoscience or non-science, because if people are making up their mind, they should rely on experts. The expert science is actually being proven over years and generations. But she's opening this door to letting all this garbage flow out, and under the guise of freedom. But this is her, again, playing to her base, but also it's playing to what she believes. Don't forget, she's had 2 reports, one relitigating the pandemic, one done by Preston Manning, and that was looking at the government regulations. And that is actually opening the door for her. She's talked about this, about using the Bill of Rights in Alberta to give the willfully unvaccinated some sort of legal protection in the future. There's also a report done coming up, we haven't seen it yet, by a contrarian doctor that she appointed to look at all the health data during the pandemic. This is a contrarian doctor who thought that that AHS had overblown the impact of COVID on hospitals. So her context is very much somebody who doesn't really believe the science of what happened during the pandemic and is letting it run amok among her party members under the guise of freedom, when you get experts saying this is really dangerous and shouldn't be allowed to happen. But politically, she's letting it happen just to appease her base, but also to say she also believes a lot of this stuff too.
There's nobody with more experience covering Alberta politics than Graham Thomson. For years, we read his work in the Edmonton Journal. You can catch him now, read him in the Toronto Star, writing for the CBC, the Tyee, and of course, Alberta Views magazine as well. Graham, it's always great to connect, man. Thanks for doing the show.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Markham, don't go anywhere. More from Markham Hislop in just a quick second, and then we're going to get to this banger of a flamethrower from Sierra on the energy war room. But first, I want to let you know that this episode of Real Talk is happening with the support of Complete Care Restoration. If disaster strikes in your neck of the woods, and that could be, of course, wildfire, that could be flooding, that could be anything that comes with spring. Sometimes it's just people doing what they think is a minor renovation project, and all of a sudden they find black mold or realize they're dealing with asbestos. Don't handle that stuff yourself. Go to the trained professionals at Complete Care Restoration. They've got more than a quarter century of experience restoring properties and rebuilding peace of mind. Our friends at Kubi Renewable Energy want to remind you that they are hiring right now. If you're an experienced, ticketed electrician, maybe you're an apprentice, just getting ready to start your career. Maybe you work in sales, you've got HR experience. Kubi is growing, and they're growing fast. They'd love to hear from you. You can check them out online at kubienergy.ca. Just follow the careers link there. We're coming up to another first of the month. Kind of, sort of. Make sure you have it circled on your calendar. If you're grocery shopping, especially for the family, remember that Freson Brothers knocks 15% off grocery purchases over $75 the first of every month. And don't forget that June is Alberta Pork Month. That means on their website, friesen.com, you can check out some amazing specials, some fantastic recipes, plus they're giving away a grill at every one of their 17 locations. You can find details on how to qualify there on their website. A shout out to our friends at California Closets. They are providing the custom closets and storage solutions for the entire home, and nobody does it better than California Closets. The best part about it, it all starts with a free design consultation. Doesn't cost you a thing to talk to their team, talk budget, talk timeline, and get a sense of what they can do for you. Get the conversation started. Get organized. Starting today with a free consultation booked at californiaclosets.ca. And also, our friends at Athabasca University want you to remember, if you're ready for a career change, if you're ready to level up your understanding of the world around you, if you're ready to get serious about your post-secondary goals, take 2 seconds to learn about the AU Advantage at athabascau.ca. Online education means your only commute is to your device. They've removed barriers, and that's why tens of thousands of alumni are talking about their satisfaction. 92% of them say they're in a job related to their field of study. How amazing is that? You'll find Athabasca University online at athabascau.ca. Markham Hislop, our guest publisher at Energy Media. And Markham, I just got to dig in a little bit more to this column you've published, Energy.media, rest in peace, oil sands companies. You only have 5 to 10 years left. I don't have to tell you that there are people right now that are working in the oil sands, people that are working on pipelines right now that are going, this guy's out to lunch. This guy's nuts. 5 years from now, does Markham think that everybody's going to be driving around in EVs? Everybody's going to be solar powered? 5 years from now, there's not a chance. What do you say to the critics, and what do you give people, fodder-wise, for the conversations they're going to be having with their friends after they read your column? People are going to say, where's the receipts, Markham?
Oh, there are plenty of receipts. I mean, one of the, there are so many trends here, Ryan, that point to the fact that the oil sand, Alberta oil and gas in general, the oil sands in particular, are going to be stressed. They're going to be challenged. That there are new energy technologies coming for their market. Now, if you're the Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, she subscribes very explicitly, by the way, to OPEC's long energy transition narrative. She says, as the OPEC does, and they have modeling to support that, that oil demand is going to grow from its current 102 million barrels a day out to 116 million barrels a day by 2045. Then there'll be a long plateau, and then maybe there'll be some decline in the 2050s or 2060s. That's the most optimistic view of the energy transition, and it would look pretty good for Alberta. But I always come back to Mom's admonition, which is, she says, as you know, hope for the best, plan for the worst. In Alberta, we hope for the best and we just ignore the worst. And I see it as part of my job is to look at the trends and say, what's the argument for the worst case scenario? Well, in this particular case, there's a very good argument. I mean, the international energy, for crying out loud. I mean, Bloomberg NEF, Oxford Institute for Energy Studies. You can go on and on about the S&P Global. It's a big one in Alberta, who say global oil demand is going to peak in 2030, 2029, and then we're going to see a decline in the early 2030s, or maybe 2035. That doesn't bode well for the oil sands. Can we at least not have a conversation about it? Is it, somebody said to me the other day, you're hostile to the oil sands. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm critical of the oil sands. I'm critical of when did we stop listening to critics? Why can't we listen to the other side when, in fact, the argument that I lay out, what it says is take action now. Begin doing something different, like pivoting to using bitumen to make advanced materials like carbon fiber. We have the options now in front of us. Why would we just ignore them and blithely cruise into the future and then get caught when the window closes and oil demand begins to drop.
Okay, so listen, before I get to the flamethrower presented by the DQs of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park, from RIP Oil Sands Companies to RIP Energy War Room, or the Canadian Energy Centre as it's called, Albertans learned this week that the government is sticking a fork in it. The experiment is done. Your thoughts, your eulogy for the War Room.
I wrote my first column about this in 2018 when then Jason Kenney was going to be premier. He announced it, and I thought it was a dumb idea then. And I wrote, I counted them up between 2018 and 2019, maybe early 2020. I wrote 9 columns on the War Room about all the, they purloined somebody else's logo a couple of times, got in trouble for that. I mean, it was just one thing after another. It was a real Keystone Cops operation. But then from 2020 to now, I wrote 2. And the reason is they're basically irrelevant. I mean, all they did was preach to the choir. They spent millions and millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars of Alberta taxpayers' money producing articles. I won't call them journalism, even though they tried to soft pedal that. But they produced these articles, and the only people that read them were the people who already believed it. I don't see any evidence that the Alberta Energy War Room had any effect on the Canadian public opinion, on federal government policies or energy policies in other provinces. I mean, it was basically a vanity exercise. They produced silly stuff like the tyranny index to prove that, a lot of the oil that's produced in the world is done by dictatorships. Like, we didn't know that already. And somehow that makes Alberta oil superior and more ethical. Well, no barrels of oil are priced or traded on the basis of ethics and morals. I mean, I can't say enough bad things about the Energy War Room. It was a symbol of Jason Kenney's government, and it should have had a fork stuck in it in 2018. Never mind, wasting all this money up to now.
All right. Very nicely done. Now we're going to hand it over to Sierra, who fires up her own flamethrower on this. You could read Markham's work, including an update on that situation at Woodland Cree First Nation and Obsidian Energy reaching a deal. Again, that's energy with an I, energy.media. Markham, it's always good to have you on the show, my man. Thanks for checking in with us.
Thank you for having me, Ryan.
Yeah, you bet. You can send us your thoughts on what you've been hearing through this discussion at talk@ryanjespersen.com. You know what we do? A lot of times, we'll find the fieriest submissions and we save them for the final episode of the week. That's because we got a bit of a tradition presented by our friends at the DQs in Palisades, Namao, Newcastle, Westmount, and Baseline Road. This is your hot takes. This is you bringing the heat, all right? This is us handing you the blowtorch and you firing up your flamethrower, and we love this one from Sierra. So much so that we're making this a special War Room edition of the flamethrower. Sierra says the closure of the Canadian Energy Centre in Alberta, aka the War Room, is a glaring testament to the inefficiencies, the misplaced priorities of government initiatives gone totally awry, born out of a misguided attempt to defend oil and gas, which I'm not an enemy of, by the way, says Sierra. This ill-conceived propaganda machine hemorrhaged public funds, $30 million, only to become a laughingstock on the national stage. The War Room was riddled with incompetence, from botched communications to dubious fact-checking, further tarnishing Alberta's reputation. Instead of addressing real issues like transitioning to renewables or supporting workers in a changing industry, the War Room wasted taxpayer dollars on a futile PR battle. It's high time we shift focus to sustainable energy solutions and meaningful climate action, rather than clinging to outdated, myopic defense mechanisms that serve no one but a narrow set of corporate interests. Good riddance to the War Room, says Sierra. Let's invest in a future that prioritizes innovation and environmental stewardship. We love that, Sierra. We loved your submission to talk@ryanjespersen.com. You can find yourself starring in a future episode of The Flamethrower. Just send us your rant to talk@ryanjespersen.com. Proudly presented by the DQs of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. Johnny Infamous and I are going to sleep 100 hours this weekend. I'm going to drink all of that throat coat tea. I'm going to chew up lozenges and get these pipes back where they need to be.
Have a
for
great
Monday
weekend.
morning. You have a great weekend
see you,
too,
buddy.
pal. Let's freaking go, Oilers. 4 in a row. No big deal. That's all we need. Charles Adler back with us on Monday. We'll see you then.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jespersen, executive producer Josh Dunford, technical producer John Hicks, general manager Katie Cook-Chivers, account coordinator Lawrence Derlego, human resources Lena Shepard, website design Mike Johnston, voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton. Real Talk's editorial board is Supriya Dwivedi, Ahmed Ali, Brandy Morin, Ann Castleman, Corey Hogan, Harman Candola, Catherine O'Neill, and Chris Henderson. Member Emerita, Julie Rohr. Real Talk is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta. Real Talk is a relay project. For more, check out ryanjespersen.com.